Have you ever been in a situation where you're trying to buy a house, and because you have gone to different houses, you've been shown different houses, and you like a certain type, but you're seeing them in two different areas that are not too far from each other, but they tell you that the price is very different? What crossed your mind? Or have you been in a situation where you're trying to buy land? You've seen one piece of land where the price was, say, 700,000, and then you're going to another location and you were seeing a similar plot of land, like land is similar, right? But you're being told that this one is 3 million naira. Your alarm bells are going off and saying, what the heck is going on here? Or, and this is my personal favorite for very simple reasons, where you've actually heard about people who have bought property, land, or even houses, and then some years down the line, they're being told that they don't actually own those properties, and they're termed and seen and accused of encroaching. Which of these three scenarios have you been in? Which one have you heard about? Which one have you experienced? All three scenarios are part of the reasons why understanding property and land titling is very important, crucial, and I would also say, to anyone who wants to invest in real estate. Reason being that the titling can change a lot of dynamics, and if you don't understand what and how each title works, you won't be able to understand, it won't make sense to you, and you would not trust why, that is the situation that they're presenting to you. Today, I'm going to be talking about that topic, land titling, helping you to understand it better. And I'm hoping that at the end of this episode, you would not only be more enlightened, but you would further appreciate the importance and power of having a title in your name. If you haven't already, now would be a very good time for you to click the subscribe button and the notifications bell, because if you don't click the notifications bell, you would probably just be stumbling across the videos. You may miss a video, but if you click the notification bell, you would actually be notified that a video has dropped and you won't miss it. Let's start off with what is a land title. A land title is a legal document that identifies who the owner of the property is. In one of my videos, I talked about what property could be defined as. Now, property could be defined as the land, the house, with its additions or natural resources, as the case may be. The same thing kind of applies to ownership. The title document is what would say who the owner is. For example, if I see a land or a property that I'm told it has a C of O, I ask, in whose name is the C of O? Is it the developer or is it the person who has bought it? All these things help to tell me a whole lot of things. And some of these things are what I'm hoping that at the end of this session, you would be better able to understand, so that when you yourself are buying, you know what you can buy, you know what could give you challenges, depending on your reason for buying it, and what it is that could even help to improve the value of your property in a much shorter period of time. Different titles would apply to human beings. It's the same way that different titles would apply to property. Now, with property, there are I would call them more like varying stages, or sometimes it could be about the approach, or it could be about how or why a different title is being processed for a property. And let's start off with the C of O. A C of O essentially is, again, a legal document that is given by the government, and it gives you the rights to use a certain plot of land for a period of time. Note that I said it gives you the right to use it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you wholly own it. And this is one thing that every time people ask, does it have a C of O? I like to say, why do you want it to have a C of O? But honestly, I can't blame people that say that, because a C of O is basically what we've been preconditioned to accept as the property title that should be always the best. And I've had people argue this point, but again, it's about how we understand things, so that's fine. However, as I've said, a C of O has a limited time for ownership. Most of the time, it gives you the right to that land for that period in time, which means that after that period in time, it no longer legally belongs to you until you reapply and renew that C of O, maybe for another title or for another extension of time. The next property title that we have more frequently or rampantly openly in our market would be the governor's consent. Now, a governor's consent is like getting approval or validation from the governor, because remember, by law, all lands literally belong to the government. So the government has to be involved in transfers and stuff like that of it. So a governor's consent would be a document that certifies and validates the fact that two people have agreed to exchange a piece of land or a property. If buyer A has, say, 6 acres of land and he decides to sell 2 acres of land to another person, and then this new person now decides to go to the state to go and apply for a title, he would first have to register a deed, and a deed is a different document that we can talk about later on. But he would go and register the deed, get his survey, which now marks out the part that is now his own, and then he would apply for a governor's consent. A governor's consent is a bit more fixed than a C of O, because with a governor's consent, you literally own it for as long as you can and you want to. So there's no time limit on a governor's consent. It just means that you own it and you own it. The next title that we can also look into would be a court judgment. Now, with a court judgment, a similar case might apply, where there is a contest on a large piece of land whatsoever. Sometimes it could even just be a dispute where two people are disputing what should be and what isn't. It could even be a business case that goes wrong. Whatever the case may be, if there is a judgment that says that person X should be the owner of this piece of land, which would also state the size, the location, what resources and stuff are on it, if there are any. But a court judgment would be very specific in terms of what piece of land and what measure of land it is that they're talking about that this new person owns. That basically is saying. So think about 2 kids who are fighting, and maybe they're fighting over a bottle of Coke that was available, and child A says, oh, my share was in the bottle. Child B says, no, my share was in the bottle. And this is a scenario where maybe there are 2 portions of it. One was in a bottle and one was in a cup. And then there's just that squabble. Once daddy comes and says, my dear, yours is in the cup, yours is in the bottle, that's literally like a court judgment. So, I'm just using these examples to help it become more relatable and that we can understand them without thinking of the technicality of it all. But that's it in principle. The next one would be an excision. So remember my initial example when I was talking about the governor's consent, and I talked about somebody having, say, 6 acres of land. Now, that person could decide that he wants to sell 2 acres to another person. What has to happen, first and foremost, is the fact that that land has to be cut out. So when they are doing the survey is going to cut out, because technically that's what an excision means. It also means excise, to cut a part of something out. So an excision is the legal document that approves, validates, confirms that excision has happened. Some people may stop at getting an excision as a title, as the case may be. Some people may just go from getting getting the agreement and asking for a governor's consent that basically says that that's what they have. But in most cases, when those things happen, most people prefer to go for an excision, or they opt to go for an excision. A lot of times, these kind of decisions based on what title it is that you go for in those kind of scenarios could be better advised by your lawyer. Please, that would be a real estate lawyer, somebody who understands and would be in better position to advise you on what type of title to go for. For me as an agent, my basis would be about getting a title that works for you. So now we're going to talk about a deed of assignment. A deed of assignment is essentially a contract that states and documents the fact that two people have agreed to exchange. One person has agreed to buy, one person has agreed to sell a certain portion of land. Could also be from a larger portion, but the deed of assignment would state all the details that they have agreed to. It will state the details of the land and the property itself, where it is, what size it is, what conditions, and things like that. It would also state to whom it is that it's said to have been paid for, what was paid for it, what was agreed to be paid for it, what would be provided. If the seller, if it's within a designated estate, the developer would also be stating what kind of facilities would also come with it. It's just generally, it's very extensive about that. A deed of assignment would have to be signed by both parties plus witnesses, and it would also be like the final document that closes the transaction between the buyer and the seller, essentially. Now, with a deed of assignment, you as the buyer could then take that deed of assignment and go to the lands registry to go and register your deed of assignment. Not registering your deed of assignment just means that the contract remains between the two of you. And if anything then happens, or if the person, I'm just saying if the seller then goes and sells that same plot of land to another person, you get lost in the process. So imagine that if the seller decides to be dubious and he sells the same plot of land or a similar plot of land with similar coordinates and all to 2-3 different people, all of you would have bought it and paid for it, and you would not know yourselves. But if one of you has registered the deed at the lands registry, then if all other people try to, then you would now become the only one who's identified or known as the legal owner. If there's a contest or there's a dispute, you tend to come up on top because you are the one that the state basically identifies with. Because every court case, every lawyer would turn back to the state to go and say, okay, in whose name is it even registered? And if none of you have registered it, then possibility is that none of you are going to get it. But that's the thing with the registered deed of assignment. Same also applies to if you are trying to get financing. If you're trying to get financing and there's no registration of the title at the state lands registry, then it is going to be difficult for you to get financing with that for that property. And this is why a lot of the mortgage or financing institutions tell you that they would only deal to take your land or property if you're looking to get financing of some sort of loan or mortgage, and they would only say that they would only deal with a property that has a C of O. Using the word C of O just explains the fact that only a property that has a registered title, a perfected title, is what they would agree to deal with. Reason is that because they're using the property as their collateral, their security, they need to be able to know that the owner of the property is the person that they're dealing with. And it's not going to be a case of that somebody's still going to come and then have taken possession of the property where they don't have access to it if the person who's taking the loan should end up defaulting. So now we've talked about the deed of assignment and it being registered. In cities like Abuja, for example, the There's also another title that matters, and it is a right of occupancy. Apparently, C of O's were not always the thing. And we all know that Abuja was kind of like newly formed in more recent time as against all the other states that were formed as far back as like the 1960s and all of that. But in Abuja, there is a title that is called a right of occupancy. And a right of occupancy is kind of like a C of O, which also gives you the rights to use the property that you are given, that you've bought, and basically gives you, again, the rights, ownership for that period and all, until you go and you process something else for it. So there we have 6 titles that are basically workable with properties everywhere. But I want to talk about the last one. This is something that a lot of people tend to think of as a title, and that is the survey. Personally, I don't think that a survey is a title. Why? Because a survey is an action that was taken. Now, a survey essentially means that you've taken cognizance of the things around you. A survey with people would mean that you have sampled their opinion. A survey for property is the fact that you have looked at the land and you have marked out the points that are in the category of what are going to be the discussion for whatever transaction it is that is. So if, for example, I'm saying I'm buying a plot of land in an estate, that I have bought a plot of land in an estate doesn't mean that I just go to any part of the estate and I take up any plot of land or just measure out any plot of land. No, it means that the estate has to assign me a certain plot of land, and then a survey would be done for my plot of land, which tells me exactly, pinpoints the coordinates for my plot of land. Remember when I was talking about the deed of assignment, I mentioned that a deed of assignment would state coordinates of your land. So a survey would give you coordinates of your piece of land out of the larger scope of land as exists. So a lot of people tend to think of a survey as a title, but it's not. Well, it's a title of sorts, but it's not any of the registered titles. It doesn't qualify as one of those that would be looked at as a perfected title, but it is like the foundation. Without a survey or a registered survey, you can't even start to process any of the other titles. So every time I want to talk about, or I'm offering, people are offering untitled, what we call untitled lands. Any land that comes with just a survey would also fall under the category of untitled lands. So there you have it. You have the 6 type of titles that can apply to land, and you have also a better understanding of what a survey is. If you're watching this video and at any point in time you have a question or you want to know more about any of these titles, please just drop a comment down below and I will come and look through that and answer that as much as possible. So people tend to ask me, and that's people who are looking for land for investment, they tend to ask what my opinion is as regards investing in land, which one of the steps or the ways to invest in land would be land banking. They come with, but part of the strategy is to buy cheap, let it appreciate, and then you sell later. So they come looking for cheap land. And most of what happens in that scenario is that cheap land, as they're looking for, would mostly be untitled. Here's my take. A few years ago, that may have worked. I'm not saying it won't work now, but there is a whole lot more that has to happen. And it is another element of risk in terms of what happens to your investment. And it probably would even make it so much more expensive compared to the value that the property then becomes, in which case you then probably have to hold it for much longer and a whole lot of other things. So the simpler way to go about it would be look for titled land that is as cheap as possible and start there. especially in Lagos, please try and stay away from untitled lands in Lagos, because there is so much going on with the authorities remapping and rezoning the use of certain lands, in areas, especially the developing areas, because what were the plans long ago are not necessarily tying out now, because a lot of migration is happening. The state is finding out that they have more people than they envisage. So yes, there is a need for certain changes to happen. And even as people, we plan one thing, with times things change and stuff like that, and then we need to review our plans. That's kind of like what's happening now with the state. And all of these things, put it into consideration. If you are in possession of untitled land, then you are going to have to probably fight harder to be able to clean it up in such a way where you don't fall victim of being within a land that has been rezoned. Because remember, you've bought untitled land, you've not registered it, the state doesn't know that you have, that it has changed hands from person A to person B or C or D. So you paying for it just means that you've paid for it. Nobody else knows technically that what it is. You've not registered your intention, you've not registered the transaction with anyone. That's part of why it remains as untitled lands. So if you want to go for land for investment, please go for titled lands that are cheaper than would be. If you are buying into an estate, look out more for an estate that has also a title that is done, or at least a title that is in process. And in process could be at different stages, but refer to a property lawyer who's going to do the due diligence on that, and that person would be in a better position to advise you. I don't like to give blanket advice that people would take as custom, especially in situations like this, because it may not work out the way that it is because of different things, and we just need a lot more information. So you're better off working from this point with somebody who can assess the situation, assess what exactly is, and take the decision. And if you want to be able to get that from me, you are going to have to share your information and the scenario, of which you would be having to look for one of the links that say work with us, and that would consult for you in that regard. I've talked about all the things around land titles, what they are, how they work, what they, how they imply, what they implied for, what they refer to, importance, why you should have one, what it can do for you, benefits, something like all of that is within this video. And if any of them have worked for you, I'd really like to hear about that. I'd really like to hear about your experiences. If you've had an experience that relates to land titling, or that was a challenge that you've resolved through land titling, please share about it in the comment section. It always helps to be able to hear back from you, because all of these things are real life. They're real life experiences for different people, some good, some bad, but the idea is that we're able to work through it. If you have a challenge around that and you think you just need someone to talk to, please just state that in the comments. Let me know. We can probably book a consultation, that we can help you clean that out, or I could refer you to someone who would be able to help you. Mostly appreciate if you actually click the subscribe button, click the notifications bell, so that when next video drops, you don't miss it.